I think whistleblowers are amongst the greatest heroes of humanity. They're the ones that have the guts to stand up for what's right and speak up.
So now let's touch on about Australia's distrust in the media overall. We know from previous episodes that you do talk about that sometimes, and there's a couple of interesting facts I'll put to you. So 76% of people worry about false information or fake news being used as a weapon, which is up from 6 points from last year, so it's an increasingly coming trend. And 53% think that the media they use is contaminated with untrustworthy information, which is quite concerning.
Yes. Well, first of all, the worst form of information is what comes out of social media. And you get the most bizarre and ridiculous stories. Things like the anti-vaccination thing. I mean, there's kids dying of measles unnecessarily now because stupid stories fly around the media.
Yeah.
If you look at the most trusted sources, and I was just teaching Aaron, my 10-year-old, about this, how you can tell. You can look at vaccination stories, and you go through and all the stuff from the Mayo Institute and Scientific American, all these reputable sources are all talking about how false it is. And you go down about page 2 and you start chiropractors talking about it. And they're talking about the dangers of it. Well, why on earth would you believe a chiropractor association as an expert on immunisation? But that's looking at something like Google. But if you actually just take what comes through your feeds, then the sensational stories and linked to autism and stuff, that comes through in spades and gets retweeted and sent out to everybody else. So one of the major problems today is people are relying too much on social media. What people should do, I believe, is rely more on traditional media. Now, I am a proud supporter of traditional media. I subscribe to The Economist, which is a brilliant magazine. It's got its own biases. I don't agree with everything it says, to New Scientist and to The Australian. And I'm happy to support traditional media and traditional journalism, because when you look at the media in general, there's always going to be a bias. Now, if you look at the Australian media as a whole, for example, you can actually look at what the bias is. So, for example, if you wanted a media that's sort of basically mainstream but right of the centre, something like News Corp is good, like the Australian or Sydney Morning Herald. That's a bit more, down market. If you want something that's sort of mainstream but left of centre, you look to the Fairfax Press, which is a bit like the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, those kind of papers. If you want a really hardline left, you go to the Communist Workers' Daily. And if you want the loony, babbling at the mouth, extreme left, you go to the ABC. But the point of it is, if you take account of the biases in all those media, you can still, they're not going to print grossly false news. It's just biased. I actually do look at the ABC website every now and then, and you just got to edit out why they're saying the things they do and understand it. But sometimes they have some useful information, and they're not going to make blatantly false claims. So I think people should actually pay more attention and support traditional media more.
Yeah, I think that's what you said was key before. You said you're willing to pay for it to support journalism. A lot of people aren't, and that's the problem with it. And that's why they're changing their models to go online, and they still can't get people to pay and all that sort of stuff, because people they do think they do have the ability to go on Twitter or to go on Facebook and whatever and see something in their newsfeed and just take it as fact, which is a concern.
Well, to me, spending $5 a week for a quality newspaper is pretty good investment, and I get good information and interesting stories and so forth. I think people should be prepared to pay a little bit, and if you don't, and if you get it all on, watching hysterical anti-vaccine diatribes on social media, well, you can blame yourself for getting false information.
I also think
garbage around.
I also think it's a general problem with people. A lot of people don't have the ability to critically think.
No,
you're not taught that in schools. You're not taught you're taught to trust what the teacher or the source is telling you without going to independently go off and look for yourself.
Oh, not me. I would argue with teachers like anything.
I'm the same as you, and I quite often did, and ended up with a lot of suspensions and detentions at school. But what I'm trying to say is, people, let's say for example, if I tell you something, as I say to you internally all the time, don't just believe what I'm telling you. Go off and verify it. And I say it to a lot of people. If someone's telling you something that they made this or whatever, don't just believe it. Go and do some research.
Potentially, there are wonderful sources out there. You can check sources. You're not restricted to one viewpoint.
Absolutely not.
Like if you have a government channel, like in some countries, you have to listen to what they say. Nobody believes it. But the fact of the matter is, you've got no other source. But if you can go on somewhere like Google and you can look up and you can get a variety of sources, yeah, people don't think critically. That's the problem. But what can you say? It's quite possible to get very, very good information. It's actually possible, more possible than it ever was in the past. It's just also very easy to get bad information too.
But it's quite scary to think about the power people have with those platforms as well. So, for example, let's say Donald Trump obviously is the president of the United States, and I don't think anyone verifies his tweets based on the grammar and anything like that. They're definitely not proofread. So someone like that could have the power literally to change the world with one tweet from a golf course, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is very, very scary. But the unfortunate thing is people should know, well, I would know that if it's just the butt of, babble, or you have to go check it out. But many people would actually rely on that as fact, and they would react on that, all that sort of stuff. It could start a war literally by a tweet.
Yeah. Dangerous man, actually. I mean, I'm somewhat right-of-centre myself, so I'm supposedly in his area, but I doubt I'd vote for him, honestly.
Well, what can people do to combat fake news? How do people know what they can trust? You mentioned a few things before by maybe subscribing to a trusted source. What else could someone do?
Well, just look at your sources. You study where they're from. Look up a particular subject. You put a question into Google and see who's saying it. And then you find out what they are. And if you don't know who they are, then you can look it up in Wikipedia, which is a great source in itself. Not 100% reliable, but it's not bad at all. Just check it out.
You're on Wikipedia too, Jim. There's a Jim Penman Wikipedia. Hopefully it's fairly accurate. You can request changes if you go through it. You can edit it and submit changes.
Actually, we should put something in on that because
we actually should have a look at it.
No, it's got a few weird stuff in it, but
we can change it. We should do a video on it, and you can go through the video. They do this sometimes with GQ magazine. They get athletes to go and look at Reddits and their profiles, and they go and correct them. So we should do a video of that.
Well, since Catherine's book come out, there's a relatively credible source which actually talks about what actually happened rather than
yeah. But we should go through that actually with you, and we'll see what's fact or fiction with Jim Penman on Wikipedia, and we can request the changes and hopefully get through. So you're saying a couple of sources.
Well, somebody could just go and edit it. You don't need to request it. You just go and edit it.
You can, but it has to be verified by other users. That makes it more strong and whole.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I've done some editing Wikipedia myself.
Have you really? Okay.
Yeah, there was something about some fictional character and so forth, and it was referring to the Chinese Tang Dynasty, and they got the dates wrong, so I went and fixed it because of course I know when the Chinese Tang Dynasty happened.
Right, there you go. Now we'll have to do a video of that. Would be quite interesting to go for that one. So I want to keep talking about one here. So one of the points here we had written down from Jake was journalists have been subject to raids and espionage for being in contact with whistleblowers to protect Australian interests. Is this an infringement of constitutional rights?
Well, I don't know about the Constitution, but they shouldn't do it.
Right.
I mean, it's appalling when they shut people down.
Yeah.
I think whistleblowers are amongst the greatest heroes of humanity. They're the ones that have the guts to stand up for what's right and speak up. I mean, journalists are an incredibly important bunch of people. They really are. The ability of whistleblowers and to have somebody to contact, and then the journalists to go out and pursue a story fearlessly. And in many countries, journalists get killed for doing what they do, and not in Australia, of course. But I think people should be protected. I think we should really do the utmost to make sure that journalists have freedom to actually write what they think is correct and follow up stories and get inside sources and so forth. I would protect them totally.
Well, I definitely think the actual profession of journalism's gone down in a lot of people's eyes. I reckon maybe, I don't know how many years ago, it would have been seen as a pretty well esteemed and sought after profession. But I actually see journalists online, let's say on social media, they absolutely get smashed by people now these days. And I think that's a profession that I think in the eyes of the public is definitely taking a hit over the last couple of years.
Well, one of the problems is that we're so much more polarised politically. There used to be much more of a sensible middle ground, and now everything's taken over by extremes. ABC's, again, I was talking about before, the extreme left-wing view, and that's the only one that you're allowed to see which is... I mean, in some ways, criticism of the ABC is unfair. There's no reason why the extreme lefties and greenies shouldn't have their own media outlet. The only question is why the rest of us should pay for it. So, one of the main problems is we just don't have the money to support them. I mean, journalists are more criticised, but there's also a lot less of them. There just isn't enough to support, and social media's taking out all the the Facebooks and so forth, and the Googles are taking out the information. They're not paying for it. I think there's a lot to be said for taxing the profits of these social media giants and somehow feeding some of that information back to the journalists. Because journalists we'd be in a really big trouble. If you have a problem with corruption and so forth, people can't get that to attention without the help of somebody. The press, a free press, is incredibly important. And if you want to if you want to shut down freedom, the first thing you got to go after is the press, as happened, say, in Russia. And basically, Russia's technically a democracy. They have votes. But people vote for the government.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, you don't even have any choice because there's very little information about anybody else. And so if they want to actually have a supposed election competition, what the Russian government does is they put up a couple of straw parties. So you've got supposed vote between, the government party and a couple of others, but they're all the same.
I know I was over in Russia. I was trying to talk to a few people to work it out and just gave up. You sort of just don't, you just leave that, don't talk about it with locals there.
Well, I think in a sense, and this is partly by history too, governments tend to reflect people, and Russians are the kind of people that tend to accept and want a stronger government. Like the good Tsar is almost the ideal for them, and someone like Putin fits into that. I mean, Putin's not that bad a leader, really. As look at the standards of someone like Stalin or Mao, he's a pretty decent guy, honestly. But the fact of the matter is, that suits their temperament in a way that it wouldn't suit us. But at the same time, it just shows the power of the media. If you want to control a country, all you got to do is just shut down the media, and it's really, really easy to take control because you can do all kinds of stuff. You can corrupt justice. You can do anything. You can bribe people. You can threaten people. You can do anything you like. If there's no press to report on it, and to hold you accountable.
And governments don't like it. People who consider free world countries, let's say like the States and what they were doing with Snowden and Assange, right? Leaking those information, claiming all these sort of things, which was quite... I don't know if you saw the video one of the videos that Assange leaked was that botched operation in, I think it was Iraq or wherever it was, right? And for me, that's the public interest. That just shows you the incompetence of it, but then all this sort of stuff happens. And
doesn't matter who the government is, they're always going to protect themselves.
But those people are very important. I know you don't like the social media aspect of this, but there are good sources online on social media who do a lot of good stuff. As you said, it's a matter of finding...
I don't like social media. Social media can be the only outlet when you've got the government controlling the major...
Let's say a video, right? So a lot of those videos, what they'll do is if they're in Iraq or let's say there's a corruption thing going on, right? They might secretly record it under the table with their video. They'll go on Facebook Messenger and they'll go and DM it to a journalist and then they'll download it and then go that way.
Social media has a very important role when the mainstream media is controlled and limited. When you can't get your view out. I'm not decrying it as such. I'm simply saying that proportionally speaking, you get a lot more flaky stuff on social media than you do on the mainstream media in a country like Australia.
Yes.
But there's a lot of great stuff on. This is on social media. This is really valuable stuff here. We're talking now.
That's true. Yeah.
So I'm not decrying it. I just think people are going to be careful who they listen to.
Or if you're a country like China, for example, you just don't allow them to come in and you create your own, like a WeChat or something like that, and you can see everything on there. So that's what you can also do.
The Chinese are very good at that sort of thing.
They're rippers. They're rippers.
They're using technology in ways that are unimaginable. And people are starting to accept that as it's a way of doing things. You don't have to have a liberal, free democracy. You can have a managed dictatorship like in China, which actually, on the whole, doesn't work too bad.
Well, excited to see the technology coming out of there over the recent years. As I said, there's so many smart people and they're just in a volume working on all these problems, and it's quite interesting. But the interesting thing, what they've done is, I don't know if you know the telephone brand called Huawei.
Of course.
And America banned Huawei, which
they're trying to get everybody else to ban it too.
Which is, I think, is ridiculous. And
well, there are security concerns because you don't know what backdoors they might put into it because the codes involved are so complex. But yes.
But saying that, there's an app, let's say like TikTok, right? TikTok's a massive social media app. TikTok's owned by China. It's a Chinese company who owns TikTok, right? And that's all in American households at the moment. And you know that American government officials, I heard this on the radio, on the podcast, anyone who works in government in America aren't allowed to have the TikTok app. Social media application, which I found quite interesting, which just shows their paranoia over the back doors and all that sort of stuff. Even though it's a social media app just used for making silly videos and all that sort of stuff and sharing. So it's quite interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how governments amongst the world regulate all those sort of things.
They're finding it very difficult because one of the problems you've got is you try and tax and regulate these people and you get up against the United States. The United States throws its weight around like anything.
That's true.
They can really, really crush you and make life difficult for you. Like the Brits want to make a free trade deal with the US, and the US is saying, well, you got to not have a go at Facebook and all of our champions. It's kind of, what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things there. So we'll leave that one there, Jim. That's a really good, insightful look into it, and make sure you subscribe to us. And if you've got any questions for Jim, put them in the comments on Facebook. And obviously every Wednesday night we do a podcast, Facebook Live, with Jim, called Ask Jim as well.